Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Gene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs. Today's guest is a senior IT executive with a wide array of technology management and innovation experiences across a wide variety of industries. He's currently the Director, Global IT Applications and Digital Innovation at Komatsu America, where his role encompasses everything from global applications platforms with massive scale to digital innovation proof of concepts for service center and field worker enablement. His current focus for digital innovation centers around employee safety and operational efficiency enablement using low-code platforms, AR, VR, and other emerging technologies for construction and mining equipment. Please welcome to the show, Daniel Schumacher. Hey, Daniel.
Hey, Justin. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you today.
I'm really glad we're getting a chance to do this. And I just want to jump right into the first question. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the deskless workforce today?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, Justin. And to me, the biggest challenge is simply just getting recognized as the real source for where innovation should be happening. All too often, we're thinking about how can technology make life better for the office worker, right? We just saw a lot of that in the COVID world. But when it comes down to it, who are the people that actually get the work done? It's the deskless workforce. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times companies think of it more as what are the technologies that I want to put in their hands versus recognizing, right, they're the ones that live this on a day-to-day basis. Let's start with them, understand their needs, and then build the technology upon that. So I really think it's just a fundamental shift in how we think about this approach of how do I deploy technology versus how do I understand their needs and address them. I think about it, if you automate 10% of what I do, now I just get that replaced with 10% different meetings. If you automate, 10% of what a service technician or what a field technician is doing, you've now created more space for him or her to focus on safety, customer satisfaction, quality. So I think it's really that challenge is really just the fundamental shift of thinking of that workforce first and foremost when it comes to technology enablement.
Do you think I think that's a really interesting point. Do you think the lack of recognition actually impacts their adoption of technology once it's actually pushed out to the field?
Absolutely, 100%. I think of an example that came about in some innovation in one of our prior lifetimes together where we were deploying a field service mobile app to technicians for the first time. And I remember showing it to some of our technicians, also showing it to some of my family members who were in the trades, and they started laughing. They're like, that'll never work. And I'm like, come on, what do you mean? We've got innovation behind this. This is amazing. And I remember my brother holding my phone and saying, look at the size of my hands. Your buttons are too small. This won't even work. And to me, that was really, one of those aha moments where I just realized, right, we were thinking about it backwards. We need to think about it in the context of, asking the folks, what would make your life better? What problems do we need to solve? And work back from there versus thinking that we may have all of the answers all of the time.
That's a great example. And as you were telling that story, I was reminded of a time when I had a good fortune of bringing one of our developers out to a manufacturing site to do a walkthrough. We just happened to be in town at the right time and we were able to bring him out on site. And one of the things that he noticed about the workers that we were going to be building a touchscreen application for in the manufacturing shop floor is that all the guys that were working in this fabrication center were wearing gloves. And it was such a simple observation. It wasn't really that big of a deal, but it was so amazing to just see his eyes light up when he saw that, and he said, "Man, when we get to writing this application, we really need to think about the fact that they're going to be wearing gloves when they're interacting with our technology." And so it was, it's a real simple example, but it can be really powerful. Had he not had that observation, or somebody on our team hadn't had that, and we built a user interface that was, too small to be interacted with gloves, it would have had a material impact. So I love hearing those real world examples of, that firsthand feedback really affects the design of the solution.
Yeah, I mean, for us in Komatsu, it all comes back to this principle of the Gemba. And, the Gemba is not something that's unique to Komatsu, but, is a Japanese word that essentially or simplistically translates to where the work occurs. So when we think about, where is our technology going to be deployed, we start with visiting the Gemba and understanding it, how does the work happen? Who does the work? What are the tools that they need? And it's really central to our principles of, until you've actually been there and seen the work getting done, right? And it's not a 5-minute visit, it's not a 30-minute visit. It's walking, it's understanding, it's going through everything. But once you actually understand how the work gets done, what's working, what's not, it's really only then that you can go about solving those problems. And I really think that's something where it's really important for people to keep that in mind, because it's so easy to be sitting in an office and think, well, I understand what this shop is like, or I understand what that store is like. But then recognizing that you could have 10 different service centers that may follow the same processes, but have unique equipment there or other things. So you really need to get down and see how the work is actually being performed before you can truly understand how to digitally enable it.
Well, and going out on site and meeting with those men and women on the front lines also helps with the recognition that, you started our conversation with, which is, if we're out there in the field and we're asking them questions and we're getting them involved in the process, then through that we're also recognizing that their role has some, unique qualities to it that we may not understand, from headquarters, and that we're recognizing that we need to gather that feedback from them. And so it kind of creates a good relationship between the folks at headquarters and those men and women in the field, which will hopefully increases the adoption of the technology once it gets out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm reminded of an example that came about probably 2 years ago. I was visiting one of our service centers and was talking with the quality manager about a component repair that they were working on new work instructions for. And I just asked him, like, so what tools are you using in this today? And he just looked at me and he's like, what do you mean tools? He's like, I get these folders with pieces of paper. And I'm like, so we rely on paper to document, to do the work instructions, to do all this. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, this actually is our business. We are remanufacturing components to get them back out to a customer mine. How does that person not have the best technology possible? Why are they relying on paper to do a job that is directly customer facing? And I think it's when you actually get the chance to sit down and talk to them is where you truly understand, what could be done differently if they had the tools. And in that particular case, the technology that we deployed to that individual is now being rolled out across all of our North American service centers, because we were able to deliver something that not only met his needs, but the needs of his colleagues around the US. So.
That's a great example. If we were to go out and talk to some of the guys on the front lines in your business, what do you think they would say is the biggest challenge that they're facing today?
I think the biggest challenge is getting the technology that we put in their hands to work the exact same way as any other tool that they pick up. So this is one of the fundamental principles that we've been applying as we talk with our field service folks and our service center folks, where, if you pick up a wrench, you don't have to log in. You don't have to connect it to the guest Wi-Fi. You don't have to restart it. It simply works. And this has really been a principle of any technology that we're deploying is, it may be, it's not going to sit in the same toolbox as a wrench, a hammer, or a screwdriver, but it needs to have that elegant simplicity. The tool does what it's fit for purpose to do. It simply works. And when you don't need it anymore, you put it away. So I think that's really one of the biggest challenges is having that design or ease of use principle in mind. So we're simplifying the work that needs to be done and not just adding a new complication to it. Now that's often easier said than done, But going back to your initial question, that's where I really think about, if we start with what challenge or what opportunity we're trying to solve for the worker, the technology becomes secondary, and then it's just a challenge for us as to how do we make it simple, how do we make it more easy to use, and once it's that easy, the adoption is that much smoother.
Well, and I think one of the things that's been missing from a lot of application development for frontline workers is really much consideration for the user experience itself. And what you're talking about is really flipping that, on its head and starting with the user experience and how we can actually enable them first and bringing that back into, the systems design. And that will result in better user adoption than just looking to have some corporate objectives that we need to gather more data from the field, and so we create this mechanism for them that they don't understand why or how it needs to be used, and then we have a lot of resistance and friction with the system, right? So the way you're describing it is fantastic and will surely yield better results.
Yeah, I mean, here's a great example of that where we started developing a shop floor technology literally days before COVID shut the world down. So we went roughly a year where we actually weren't able to get our developers into the Gemba to see how the technicians were actually using it. Now, it was wildly successful. We rapidly went from proof of concept to production. But what was really interesting is, when our travel lifted and we were actually able to get to the Gemba again, within 15 minutes of my developer talking with Richard on the shop floor, it became instantly apparent that we had a flaw where, our screen only allowed data input for one component repair at a time. And Richard quickly pointed out, well, these particular components come in pairs. He's like, so it's great that I don't have to use paper anymore, but now I need to toggle between different repairs to enter the data. Would it be possible to just put these two columns together visible on the same screen? And it was one of those things where for us, it maybe was a 2-hour change. It was, incredibly small, but until we were able to be there in person with him, we had no idea that these were done in pairs instead of on their own. And Richard had no idea that just making that change was actually a simple fix. So I think it's, it sounds so simple, but it really just comes down to the basic principles of communication and collaboration really helps you bring things to life that work for everybody.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's a great example. I want to switch around to your role a little bit. Tell us about your role and what you're responsible for inside Komatsu.
Yeah, it's a lot. So global IT applications and digital innovation. The way that I try to oversimplify the explanation of that is essentially, you know, any technology outside of what is embedded in our products or is part of a global Komatsu platform coming down from our corporate parent. Pretty much everything else falls under my applications team, whether it's our global instances of SAP, our Salesforce CRM, manufacturing IT, engineering IT, enterprise integration, and then most recently adding in the digital innovation capabilities, so low code, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and it's a lot under one team. But we're finding by having all of those under one roof, if you will, it's allowing us to identify and unlock how can we get access to information that otherwise would have been inaccessible, right? How do you get a low code app connected to SAP so we can retrieve customer data on the shop floor? So it's a very wide variety of roles, but it exposes us to a lot of different parts of the company and gives us opportunities to see things that sometimes for the first time, and then figure out how we can drive improvements.
Where are you seeing the push for innovation at Komatsu? Where is that coming from inside the organization? Is it customer fed? Is it coming from business leadership? Maybe all of the above. Where do you see that coming from?
So it actually comes directly from our founder. So we're actually celebrating the 100th anniversary of Komatsu, and the founding of the company was based on a unique set of principles that you don't find very much. So there was a village in Japan that was largely sustained by a local copper mine. As their mineral deposits were running out, it became very clear that when the mine shut down, the town would die. So our founder decided, I need to start a company and I'm going to focus on, continuing to deliver innovation. Now, he didn't use those words 100 years ago, but the principles were basically you take care of your people, you take care of your customers, you act relentlessly with pursuing higher quality and the features that your customers want, and from the rest, good things just follow. So when you ask that question, right, innovation doesn't just come from my team or from my boss. It's just fundamental in how our company operates, no matter what function you're in. There is always a better way to do things. We have a principle that we call dantotsu, that it doesn't have a really easy translation directly into English, but the principle of it is essentially, we pursue excellence at all times, and once you've achieved it, you try to make it even better. So that really is just fundamental to our DNA. And so quite frankly, we really don't know how to operate differently, right? Once you've done something innovative, there is always going to be a way to make it better, to make it easier to use, to make it more efficient. So it's really just fundamental into how we operate as a company, whether it's the products that we bring to our customers, whether it's the technology we use internally, or really just everything that's part of how we operate.
So with innovation comes risk. And one of the things that I've seen with companies that have been around for a long time is they struggle to find the balance between their aversion to risk and trying to be innovative. It sounds like you personally are immersed in the Komatsu culture, and that the culture there, leans toward innovation, which is fantastic. How do you feel that balance is struck between looking at the risk factors to innovation versus being able to deliver new capabilities and improve safety and all the other things that we've talked about?
It's a great question, and the way that I describe this to my teams is simply, you find the right people to work with. Now that's where it gets tricky, right? Who is the right person to work with? So when we're looking at, how can we enhance an existing technology, let's go find one of the most advanced users, or somebody who is more open to exploring the art of the possible, who will understand that our goal is not to be successful 100% right from the start. Because if we deliver 100% success right away, we probably haven't challenged ourselves enough. So
Shot too low.
we try to find business partners that understand that, where our goal is to push the boundaries, to do that with a mindset of appropriate levels of risk. But essentially, every time something doesn't work the way we thought it was going to be, that's a learning that now helps us advance other capabilities. So we typically work with subsets of our organization that kind of enjoy that innovative spirit as well. There's some folks that we partner with under the tone of, nobody really knows that we're doing this. We're going to experiment with you. If it works, we'll share it with other people, and if it doesn't work, we'll chalk this up to a learning. So I think it really comes down to the people element, right? You can have the greatest technology in the world, but if you don't have a way to make it relevant for the person, it's just not going to be successful. So I think that's really an important principle to it. It's the combination of the people, the processes, and the technology that are really required, right? Some people are more innovative than others, and we work with those folks who like to lean in and on the more bleeding edge capabilities. And then when we've proven it successful, then expand to the rest of the group.
How do you and your team learn about new technologies? Is it driven by the business asking you to implement something, or do you have any type of processes or an advice you could share to the rest of us of how you might scan the market looking for those emerging technologies?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the analogy that I use with my teams is, I am always looking to plant new seeds. There's a story that I heard once that drives a lot of what I do and how I think, which was, what is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When
Right.
is the second best time to plant a tree? Today. So with my teams, I really look at it as, every week we should be planting a new seed or a new idea of something. It may be big, it may be small, it may be a wild out there guess. Who knows? So to specifically answer, where do we go to get that information? Part of it is through our technology partners. We're constantly exploring with them. What is the art of the possible? What are the ideas that you're not even experimenting with yet, and how could we potentially prove those out within a Komatsu use case? Some of it is just looking at adjacent industries. So What are things that people are doing outside of mining and construction, and how might that apply to us? And then most recently, just trying to get connected with other smart and innovative people. There's different universities have fantastic innovation programs. Getting a chance to talk to them, and just kind of looking into what other think tanks are out there. What are they working on? What is the art of the possible? So it's really keeping our minds open to any and all innovation, and then trying to see, oh, is there a use case in mining? Is there a use case in construction and forestry? But we really just look at the entire world around us as a potential source of inspiration.
One of the things that I feel is like been a theme already just in the beginning of this conversation is that success doesn't necessarily mean to you that what you set out to do worked the first time. And you seem to have a culture of experimentation, which I think is part of the balance of the risk mitigation, right? So you're not going into all of these exercises just assuming that it's going to work exactly as you expected, but that you're willing to go out and try some things. And it not working doesn't mean failure. It not working needs to be thought of as a learning event so that you can then build on that and and adjust your course. I think that's a fantastic lesson for all of us to work in such a mature organization, but one that's still willing to challenge status quo and try some new things. That's a pretty powerful place for you guys to be on as a team.
Yeah, I mean, the way that we try to operate is, yes, we are part of a multi-billion-dollar global corporation, but we need to have the mindset of a startup innovation company, right? So we have the foundation and the principles that give us the air cover, but we need to be more open-minded and think differently. I challenge my team at times where I'm like, we need to stop thinking like IT people, because the rules that applied 15 years ago to that technology no longer applies. I had a conversation with one of my highly talented young people, and he's like, this just feels wrong. He's like, I feel like we're not following the rules. The SAP team is doing this. We're doing something completely different. And I told him, I'm like, Zach, that's how you know you're innovating, right? If what you're doing seems completely unreasonable, you're doing something that people haven't done before. So if you are feeling comfortable, you're probably not challenging yourself enough. So I think it's really important. Now, that doesn't mean you just go off and do wild and crazy things. You need to have the foundation of the principles, but I think it's having that mindset to just kind of challenge everything we've learned over the years, and be more open-minded, and just approach things uniquely and differently.
Yeah. When you think about, circling back around to frontline workers specifically, I mean, your responsibilities inside Komatsu include both desk-bound workers and as well as, frontline workers, deskless workers on the front lines. So do you have ways that you think about those worker profiles differently as you're looking to innovate?
Absolutely. So my personal goal is to ensure that those frontline workers have the most advanced technologies in our company. And I'm not just saying that to be nice, but what I find is, when we're working with the right people kind of on the edge of innovation, that's where good things really happen. And I would tell you, some of our frontline workers are some of the most technologically innovative people in our company. There's a gentleman at one of our service centers who I had a chance to meet in person, talked regularly through COVID. And when I was sitting in his office, he started showing me the power apps that he was building in his free time. And I'm like, Jason, you're building power apps in your free time? He's like, yeah, this is pretty cool. Do you want to see the automation here? So to me, that was just, again, going back to the top, oftentimes the frontline workers aren't where we put our innovation because we think it's going to be something different. But what we've actually found is, when we give them access to the most cutting edge technology that we have, good things happen. Where I'm trying to think of a couple of good examples. There's some spaces that we've been working in with augmented reality where, by the end of this month, we'll have actually gotten augmented reality devices into customer mine sites, right? And it's not just us playing with cool things. It's the technicians recognizing this is something that can help me operate more safely, more efficiently. Our customers seeing that too. So that's where my personal belief in just our team's operations is, the people who have the best, most advanced tools absolutely should be those frontline workers.
You think the guys in the field would have a response to the phrase digital transformation? You think what would they say if they heard you talking about digital transformation?
I'm trying to think how much I can actually repeat from the conversations that I've had of those. Um,
No
and that
FAA regulations on a podcast. Speak freely.
right. No, it's
Oh, you mean
the
your internal privacy?
no, probably a little bit of both. I'll be honest. For myself, I managed these teams for probably a year before I had a chance to actually get out and visit a customer mine site, or before I had a chance to get and visit a customer construction site. And I will never forget driving around with our account executive through this particular mine, and he's like, "You see this? Salesforce no longer works once I get here." I'm like, "Well, then how do you start entering your field notes?" He's like, I write it all down, and then when I get back to the office, I have to type it in. I'm like, "That sounds terrible." But it was those principles where I'm like, oh, some of these things work really cool if you're sitting in an office, but if you're actually at the Gemba where the work happens, they don't work at all. So that's where it's been the most enlightening, is going from a principle or an idea to understanding from the men and women that actually do the work what's feasible and what's not. When we first started deploying augmented reality devices to our service center staff, the first couple times it actually required me to fly one of my IT people out to simply get the device connected to the Wi-Fi network. And Jason was very clear. He's like, if you have to send Zach to every service center just to do the initial connection, this is not viable. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. Give me that device back. We're going to come back when this is viable, right? So now we're doing that with a QR code. You turn it on, you take a picture, and bam, it's connected. But I think that's where it just gets back to, the best technology in the world is completely useless unless it's doing something to make that technician's life safer, better, more efficient, period.
Yeah. And I think we have to recognize that the bar has been set now for all of our internal teams by the consumerization, or not really the consumerization of IT, but basically our consumer experiences. We use Facebook and Netflix and Amazon and all these other, technology tools essentially is what they are. And, it influences our expectations for what we should expect from work. And a lot of times we don't get those experiences, at work with the technology that we're asked to use. And so by putting a focus on that user experience, and I love your example about even just connecting to the network. I mean, if you can't even connect to the network and use the device properly, then all of the other efforts that you've made behind that are all for naught.
Yeah, that's spot on. So
Yeah.
spot on.
So I know you have a particular focus area around safety, and I'd like to spend a few minutes with you on that, and specifically understanding kind of the convergence of safety and technology, and in particular, the men and women on the front lines who are probably in the most vulnerable position, from a safety standpoint. What can you share about the innovation that you're looking at from a safety standpoint?
Yep, and this may become a 3-part podcast starting right now, because you're going to get me going on a topic that is not only fundamental to the Komatsu way, but for myself personally. When everybody leaves the house to go to work in the morning, they leave the house, they go to work, they need to come home with the same number of toes, the same number of arms, the same number of legs, right? That's what I look at, is how can we help honor that commitment to our men and women so they go back safely to their families at night. And you start thinking about, how do accidents happen? Well, there's a reason they're called accidents. And oftentimes it's people who are well experienced that know what they should be doing, perhaps making an incorrect choice in the moment and then paying the consequences for that choice. Now, all too often, we have safety manuals that are bound and sitting in somebody's desk drawer, or they're 2 inches thick, and how often are people going to flip through to see the exact procedure? Where we see technology playing a huge role in the life of our field service and service center technicians is that safety component. So if I'm in the middle of a component repair or a component lift, do I have time to pause something, go pull my manual out, make sure that doesn't drop, and read what's going on? No, I don't. So therefore, I'm going to try to make my best guess. On the flip side, if I have an augmented reality device that's on my head, allowing me to be hands-free, that is allowing me to visualize the exact safety execution of this repair that needs to happen, I don't even have it at my fingertips. It's just there. So our belief is that, if the right people know how to do the right component repairs or the right fixes safely every time in that moment, they're going to have more safety, right? They're going to have fewer injuries. They're going to have fewer lost time, because in that moment, it's not going to be, well, geez, do I turn left after this or do I turn right? The instructions are going to be right there. So, when we really look at this, again, it's not just technology for its own sake, but if we can do things that help them have the information they need at their fingertips, it's going to reduce injuries. It's going to reduce those consequences, and really just allow us to continue focusing on quality work.
What are some of the things that might hold you back from being able to innovate around safety to the extent that you'd like to?
It's a big change. I'll use the example of the assisted reality headsets, right? People just aren't used to operating that way. And I've had some people say, well, I can just hold my iPhone up and take a picture of it. I'm like, well, if you're walking around a machine while you're holding your iPad at something, you're distracted, right? You may trip, you may not notice something. Whereas if you are walking around a machine and you're doing the recording, but you have full access to your hands and legs, yes, that's going to look different, but it results in a safer experience. It's a bit of an organizational change management, but that's where I keep on going back to the engagement with the employees, where, look, the intention here is not for me to try to find cool IT stuff to play with. I actually care. My teams care. We want you to come to work, be safe all day, and go home to your family with the same number of toes, the same number of fingers, et cetera.
You mentioned organizational change management and just getting engagement, from the men and women on the front line. So have you developed any best practices around how specifically to deal with the change management implications of that new technology to make it perhaps feel a little less uncomfortable for them?
Yeah, it really comes down to listening. And I know that sounds incredibly simple and possibly incredibly vague, but I think listening is one of the most important things that we can do. And then meet them where they are. What are your concerns with this? Why do you have those concerns? I have an interesting family connection in that my father-in-law was a heavy fab welder his entire career with P&H, the precursor to what is now Komatsu Mining Corporation. So when I talk to him about some of these innovations, he naturally, his head goes to the line of, well, you're doing this so you can replace people. You're doing this so, you only need 9 people to do what 10 people did. And I'm like, no, Ron, that's not what I'm doing. I'm making sure that with this technology, you're able to do things consistently, more safely. This is not about replacing people at all. It's about ensuring that everybody stays whole. They don't get injured. They can do their job, more safely with higher quality, et cetera. Now, I'm mindful in many cases, if we're going from a process that was on paper to one that's now using an assisted reality device, that's a massive jump. So really, the bigger the gap that you have to bridge for technology innovation, you need to really spend twice as much time understanding the people, understanding what their views, what their concerns would be, and truly meeting them where they are. And what I found is, when you're successful at listening to their point of view, that is the moment when it stops becoming an IT project and it becomes a business project. And I've got a great example of one of those that popped up recently. I got a frantic text from one of my senior managers saying, I need to talk to you immediately. Something's up with the technology that we were piloting at one of our plants. Pick up the phone, call him, like, hey man, what's going on? And he's like, okay, those low code apps that we were working with person X and Y on? I'm like, yeah, how are those going? They're like, really good. Here's the problem. The president of our business was at that plant today and they showed him the apps. He's like, I'm so sorry. They didn't say anything to me. He was kind of freaking out. And I just calmed him down and I'm like, Kevin, that tells me that what you guys are delivering is not only successful, but that has now gone from being an IT idea to being a business tool. And it was one of those moments where we're like, it was so good, they didn't even think to talk to us anymore because it was no longer our idea. And that can be a shift for us as technology professionals, because it's like, no, this was my baby. I wanted to take the credit. But when something moves from being an IT product to just being part of how the business operates, that's where I go back to, at that point in time, that now works like a wrench. It now works like a screwdriver. It is just part of how the business operates.
Yeah, and that's when you're going to see, just the engagement just pick up, and that's what's exciting to hear about your story is that so much time is often spent on all of the nuts and bolts, the ones and zeros behind the scenes, to make technology work. But if we're not getting into the hands of those men and women in a way that allows them to engage with it and actually start to use it like you're describing, then it could all be for naught, and that's where the risk comes. And you mentioned something else I thought was interesting, which is the gap between the current state and the future state. And the wider that is, the greater the risk. Those are my words, not yours, but that's essentially what I was taking away. That if that gap is too large, then the risk is actually greater to that adoption. And so part of the change management ought to be to really recognize how big that gap is, to make sure that we can give the users a bit of an easier on ramp to that.
Yeah, and I think it's, a lot of times when we're going through those change management discussions, I have my team think about, let's remove the technology from the equation, right? If you're used to doing something in your personal life outside of work and you've been doing it this way for 10 to 20 years, and somebody walks up to you tomorrow and says, I would like you to do this way now, like, how would you react to that, right? So it's really, as I know it sounds overly simple, but we try to put ourselves in the shoes of the people that are going through the change. And if it's going from version 1.1 to version 1.2, okay, great, there's not much there. But again, if you're going from a paper-based process to digitized work instructions on a RealWare HMT1, that's a bit of a jump. And we need to be mindful of, how quickly can people change in our personal lives? How quickly can we change in our professional lives? And helping them through that change to understand the rationale, and really just getting back to the fundamental principles of how we treat each other as people. So it is, sometimes it sounds too simple to be true, but I think at times we overcomplicate it. And if we just get back to how do we treat each other like good humans, it flows naturally from there.
I completely agree. And addressing the what's in it for them so that they can really understand, and it allows you to show that you've been thinking about them through the process. This isn't just something you're trying to get from them, but actually, hopefully providing them with something that's going to improve their quality of life, at work and hopefully outside of work as well. I know this next question is perhaps a bit unrealistic, but I'd just like to remove some of the constraints from our thinking a little bit. And I know that money and resources are always an object, but if they were not an object, what do you really see as being the vision? What would be the ideal future state with the people that you support in your organization from a tech and innovation standpoint?
Yeah, great question. And hopefully I'm not a bit too revolutionary or controversial when I say this, but you've known me a while.
Yep.
Um, you know, I really think that we are at an inflection point with how businesses identify between, the IT teams and the business teams, or the IT teams and the operations teams. I personally believe that 3 to 5 years from now, that won't exist. Or for the companies that get it, you're not going to have this breakdown between IT and operations. You're going to have operations that are completely embedded and empowered by IT. And I think the organizations that continue to have those as separated, I think will be the ones that start falling further and further behind. We've, as part of our transformation, we've actually taken people out of roles that traditionally would make sense. And I've asked my teams at times to take a leap of faith with me. And I'm like, look, trust me, this is new. Nobody else is doing it this way. But if you wake up every morning and your goal in life is to live, eat, sleep, and breathe, helping our service people have better technology and making their life better and safer, good things will happen. And I will never forget the look on one of my managers' face when I was trying to convince him, why should you stop being an SAP senior manager and start focusing on service center enablement? He was looking at me, he's like, you're just putting me out to pasture. You're just trying to fire me. And I'm like, no, Mark, this is the future. So, I really believe that convergence, you either lean into it and embrace it and create it, or it will happen to you. Or, as I look at it in our industry, do we want to be the ones that are defining the future of how that work happens? Or do I want to follow what other competitors or other disruptive forces have come in and now told me what to do? And I think that change is possible for a couple of reasons. Partially just due to the nature of the technology that exists today, right? It's not like it used to be 10 to 15 years ago where you needed 5 to 10 years of experience before you could even be reasonably dangerous deploying a new technology. We have seen smart people get access to digital capabilities and go from proofs of concept to actually driving business change in a period of 3 to 6 months. And part of that is because the power of the tools that are available and the more simplistic ability to implement them. So I really look at it as we need to push ourselves to lose our identity as IT and just become part of, this is how technology is enabling these business processes. And I think for organizations that don't embrace and lean into that, the technology is going to happen. It's just going to happen without you. Because the tools no longer require, as much detailed license management, as much hosting, et cetera. I use this example of Jason at one of our service centers, right? He's building Power Apps with Power Automate flows, right? You no longer need to be an IT guy or an IT gal to deliver that type of transformation. So I really see that as an inflection point where we need to be driving that shift in eliminating the lines between the business and IT and really just becoming part of, this is just how we operate.
Those are really amazing points, and I think that's what's most important, is that ultimately the innovation is there to serve the employees, the customers, and the business, right? So the technical aspects are just a means to that end, and so it sounds like shifting the focus around to those business and people objectives is really the primary objective there, and that's awesome.
Yeah, and it really should be. I oftentimes remind my team, the only reason that they need a director of global applications and digital innovation is because there are men and women out there who are engineering products, manufacturing products, and then servicing those products. So, yeah, I really need to be focused. So those are the people that create value. Those are the people that create who we are, that differentiate us in the marketplace. So we should be waking up every day and figuring out, how do we make their life better? How do we make it safer? How do we make it more efficient so that, the people who are doing the jobs that actually drive our company, if they can do it safer, better, and more efficiently, that's where the magic happens. So it's one of those where it sounds so simple, but when you just take a step back, it is absolutely true. I don't generate revenue for the company. The person who's doing an engine component repair is doing that, and helping them do more of that, do it safer, is really where we need to be at, and making sure that their job is getting done better and not worrying about, who we are as part of a corporate IT function. So that's where I really feel strongly that, if you remain in separate silos, you're gonna miss it. Whereas if we truly operate as one business, operation trying to do the same thing, that's where I think that the magic is going to happen.
That's awesome. I'd like to give everybody a little bit of background on you, and I'd like to hear a little bit about the history and how you ended up in the role that you're in today. Take us back to how you ended up in this role at Komatsu, and with the experiences that you've had.
This is where you are either going to laugh or I will no longer be part of this podcast. So I dropped my only IT class in college because I hated it. I thought it was the stupidest class that I had ever been a part of. And I am somebody who, I finish what I set out to do, but I simply could not take the class anymore. I had no passion. It was one of the worst classes I had ever had. And I will never forget my professor telling me that I was a quitter and I would never amount to anything. I was very tempted to give him a call when I landed my first business unit CIO job, but
you didn't make the call. You didn't make the call.
No,
Okay.
I did not. But so the interesting thing for me was, so I graduated with a business degree and a heavy focus on corporate finance. I joined Anderson Consulting directly out of college, and still not quite sure how this happened, but I joined Anderson Consulting in Milwaukee, and my first project was being sent to learn SAP ABAP in Frankfurt and working at an SAP solution center. Really had no idea what I was doing, but it sounded interesting and, fresh opportunities. So what struck me for the first time at that solution center, I started to understand, it's not just ones and zeros, it's not just IT, but you can use technology to make business processes run more efficiently and more effectively. And to me, that was the aha moment where I'm like, this isn't about the technology, it's about the business and what the technology can do to it. So even to this day, I still don't consider myself to be an IT person. And I think that at times has freed up my thinking in ways where traditional IT folks, you learn different offenses as you're going through those classes in college. And I think in some ways, having dropped my only IT class and not taking any other ones, I didn't learn some of those habits. I essentially grew up professionally in an environment where it was, there's a business problem, or there's a business challenge or a problem, or there's a new opportunity. How do we blend people, process, and technology to bring those to life? So that really powered my early career at Anderson Consulting and Accenture. Joined PricewaterhouseCoopers, working in their systems and process assurance practice in the very early days of Sarbanes-Oxley, which gave me a completely different perspective on technology and the risks that could come along. I don't want to say the dark side, but one side is, how do you drive business transformation using technology? But if you're not appropriately controlling it, what are the bad things that can happen? And we can go back a decade or two and understand why all of those things happen. But it was really when I met this guy named Colin Boyd, who was the CIO of Johnson Controls, that it all kind of changed for me. JCI was one of my largest audit clients. And as I started getting to know Colin more and just understanding his views of technology, right, that's really where I learned so much of this, the principles of technology enablement, really focusing on, what are the challenges? How do you get after it? And essentially selecting the technology is probably third or fourth on the list. Or if you've done all of your other homework, the technology choice is usually quite simple. But all too often we start with the technology first and then try to figure out what problem we're trying to solve. And it was through one of my roles at Johnson Controls that we had an opportunity to meet in the global workplace solutions business. But that was really the transformational moment for me, where I went from working kind of with corporate functions to, we had thousands of men and women all over the world doing field service management, doing building management. And we really started looking at, if you can do things through technology that make their life safer, more efficient, more effective, they're happier, the quality of our work goes up, customer satisfaction goes up. So it was kind of this, this secret sauce, if you will, where if you're empowering the people that are actually doing the work with the right technology, the rest just takes care of itself. So that really, worked through my time at Johnson Controls, through CBRE. And then I joined Komatsu about 3 years ago. Our CIO is a guy named Colin Boyd, so you can put that math together a bit. But one of the most fun aspects for me was getting to meet the men and women, in our mining and construction service centers, understanding, it's one thing to go work in an office building in downtown Chicago repairing HVAC, units. It's another thing altogether to go into a surface mine and repair a piece of mining equipment that weighs 5.5 million pounds of solid steel. So it really has brought new perspectives, and I think new and unique opportunities to, you can call it field service, you can call it service center, but there's so many different flavors depending on what types of interest or what types of environments or industries that you're in. And it, given the diversity of the products that we manufacture, there's always something new to learn. And I've really enjoyed that.
What's your favorite part about working in technology?
What's my favorite part about working in technology? I think it's the look on the face when somebody has something that's working and they like it, which sounds overly simple, but when you can look at somebody and that you've made their life better, safer, more efficient, there's just something to be said for that. There's a gentleman at one of our service centers where we deployed some low code technology. And when we asked him, we're like, hey, how's this working for you? And he's like, conservatively speaking, you guys have eliminated 50% of the administrative time that I used to have to spend. And I was like, come on, man, there's no way. And he's like, yeah. He's like, I used to have to write these forms out, then take these pictures, then format these pictures, then add them into a Word document, then do this and this and this. He's like, now I take the pictures with the iPad, I click this button and my customer report is generated. So, the look on Steve's face, the look on Jason's face, the look on other folks' face where you can actually see you've done something that makes their life better. That's really what I enjoy the most. So.
I just had a similar conversation with a colleague this morning. We were talking about that transition point when we're evangelizing technology to end users and to the organizations that they work in. And then there's this transition point where all of a sudden those end users become the evangelists themselves to their colleagues. And it's that point that all of a sudden you can just step back and say, okay, now this thing is self-sustaining. It's going to be successful. And there is joy, like legitimate joy of being on the side of having been involved in creating those solutions and maybe dealing with a lot of challenges to deal with the change management, but to see them now accept it and own it and really want to make it theirs, and then to go promote it internally. There's really, that's about as good a job satisfaction as you can get doing the types of things that we do. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's so true. Again, this is counter to how a lot of organizations think, but again, I love it when an IT project ends and it gets taken over as a business initiative, right? And I always remind my team, just smile, guys. Like if this is no longer an IT project, that is the number one way that that this is a success is if it's now business strategy and not IT strategy, we've done something right.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, because we're already running out of time and I knew this was going to happen, I am curious, what do you love to do outside of work?
Lots of stuff. A couple of my biggest passions, my wife leads kids ministry at our church and I'm one of her number one volunteers. So I love spending time with the kids and just working with them, engaging with them. I'm a huge baseball fan. So I really wish it was a year-round sport. So there would always be a game on at night. And this time of the year, I'm in seventh heaven, devouring stats and obscure data facts and history. But those two things in particular, spend a lot of time like getting out golfing with the family and, in some ways just enjoying some quiet time and some nice weather to just be at rest.
How long of a year do you get nice weather living up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin?
About 6.5 days. So
okay,
today is about 3/4 of that. So yeah.
Okay. So I don't want to take up any more of your time then. On a Friday afternoon, I'm taking up time from you enjoying some of that nice weather on the 6 days that you get it. So we are actually going to have to wrap it up there. We've already come up to the end of this time. And I really, really appreciate you taking a few minutes. And I do think we're going to have to do at least one more of these at some point throughout the year. So we'll circle back around and schedule with you. I hope everybody else has found this conversation as enjoyable as I have. And if so, please share and rate the podcast. 5-star ratings help ensure that it gets promoted to other professionals like you that are innovating on the front lines. This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, the mobile digital adoption platform for deskless and frontline workers. Visit the website at skillful.com. That's SKYLLFUL.com. And if you or someone you know is out there innovating on the front lines, we'd love to hear about it. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn and share your story, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.